Hi, welcome everyone. Today I'm going to read this article by Eric Adler, who is I think, a professor of classics. There we are. Never heard of him, doesn't matter. Um, I saw this popping up somewhere and I found this very striking because until a few years ago, or even just very recently, if you mentioned anywhere that they are killing the humanities and on purpose, well, guess what they would have called you. And I also just have to say, no kidding. It should be so obvious that the humanities are being slashed left and right on purpose, and that this isn't just happening just so. But there's a purpose behind it, and it is not just happening in the U.S. This article is looking at the U.S. This is an opinion piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Now, if you happen to be from Europe, you will certainly have heard of the so-called Bologna Process, which was started officially about 25 years ago. And of course, the European Union technocrats, they have a good sense of humor. So they met in Bologna, the birthplace of the university, to tear down the European university. If you've never heard of it, just look up a Bologna Process. By the way, if you have a question or a comment that you'd like me to read out, leave a super chat and I'll get to your question or comment at the end of this discussion of how they're killing the humanities on purpose. And I'll say this again, until rather recently, saying anything like this would have meant that you are a conspiracy theorist. Why would anyone want to kill her? This just happens. Things just happen. By the way, this destruction of the humanities also takes the wind out of the sails of those who proclaim that the cathedral is in charge of everything. It's complete nonsense. The cathedral, so-called, is not in charge of anything. The cathedral, if that's even the appropriate name, is just executing what it's supposed to execute by that which power really wants. So, but before we begin, let me just point out that there is a place where the humanities are alive and well, and that is, of course, my Halion Academy. So, either maybe you're new here, or maybe not, but if you haven't done so yet, get a course. For example, Plato on beauty and virtue, or the intellectual life right here, which is a reimagination of the life of the mind in the digital age, something that a university could never even teach, even if they wanted to. And we keep it classical, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, or, of course, German idealism, Hegel, Heidegger, Kant's critical philosophy, Leisure with Dignity on the Art of Living, Plato, Aristotle, Heidegger, Bertrand Russell, Nietzsche, Wilhelm von Humboldt, etc. So if you're interested in the art of living, that's it for you. Plato's Republic. It's, of course, another foundational, if not the foundational text for Occidental thinking, and not only for political philosophy, but also for Western metaphysics. So head over to the Halion Academy website and support the project to keep the humanities alive and well outside the dying dinosaur institutions. And I should mention that we have a very interesting special course coming up on health and virtue, which you see here. A Journey to Wellness with Plato and Aristotle. Yeah. So if you're interested to think about health, and also, of course, not just to think about it, but to enact changes in your life, seminars for this live Zoom seminars begin on Saturday, the 6th of September. We've got a couple of people already enrolled. We meet from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 7 to 9 p.m. Central European Time. And just scroll down, you'll find different tiers you can enroll. Usually people, that's the most popular tier, Philosophical Fellowship, the seminars. So that's the one you want to enroll in if you'd like to join the seminars. Now, thanks everyone who's listening. If you are listening to this on YouTube, if you'd like me to read your comment or question at the end, leave a super chat. If you're listening to this on Twitter, just leave Twitter and come join us on YouTube. All right, so let's start reading this piece on the Chronicle, or the chronic disease that is higher education. Again, they're killing the humanities on purpose. The crisis, says the author, is not one of resources, but of values. There's a link in the description of this video to this article if you want to read along. University leaders in the United States are slashing the humanities left and right. And I wonder if that's a political remark, but it probably is. If you take what they say at face value, it's because of their limited fiscal capacities. But there is growing evidence that this isn't the case, that it isn't a lack of capacity so much as a fundamental lack of will on the part of administrators and boards of trustees to support humanistic education and research. How have the priorities of these university leaders wandered so far away from the age-old value of humanistic education and the true purpose of the liberal arts? Now, I wonder, so this was published a week ago. I wonder where the author has been for the past, I don't know, 100 years. Now, America is a bit of a different story from Europe, perhaps, because you have liberal arts colleges, etc. But even those are ultimately just small, almost cultish, sectarian colleges that serve certain communities and are extremely expensive to get any sort of so-called humanistic education or liberal arts degree. And very often those are just the basis for continuing your studies. Let's say in you get a master's or in law, perhaps, or an MBA later on. Now, I would much prefer a world in which MBAs and lawyers actually have read some of the classics, rather than having just studied in a good technocratic fashion, whatever their degrees demand of them, so that they can function well later on. But still, the the world that perhaps is being summoned here no longer is. So that is one of the reasons why those degrees and courses and programs, etc., are being slashed. They are no longer required. We are entering into a post-literate world. That's to say, not illiterate. Everyone can read. if by reading we mean, taking in certain just superficial taking in of information, but we are already post-literate. This isn't coming further down the pike. This is already where we are, and To some degree, just to play the devil's advocate. Maybe those administrators are just doing what's necessary to be done anyways, because students are no longer learning anything anyways. They come and they use ChatGPT, let's be honest, to write their essays. And a few years ago, you find a video here on my YouTube channel, which is entitled "The College Essay Has Been Dead for Decades." When ChatGPT was first published 3 years ago, people were freaking out because this was the death of the college essay. The fact is that universities and colleges, especially in the humanities, have made them so homogenous and so there's a certain, let's say, there's a certain framework, or if you follow certain steps, you can always get a good mark, but you will never actually start thinking or or genuinely critiquing anything, or genuinely engage with a certain text, because you are always already required, even as a first, second, third year student, especially once you get to MA level or PhD level, to engage basically only with secondary literature. Yeah. The completely inane and useless exercise of publishing articles and papers at this point is only there to do two things: to have a currency on your CV that you use to get a job and get ahead in the academic game. The amount of first year students in bachelor degrees that told me, "Oh, I'm playing the game now, to get ahead," is beyond absurd. Now, what's the second reason to write a paper? The second reason to write a paper and publish it now is to show to which citation ring you belong. Yeah, that means you cite, you quote all your friends and peers and whoever's on your side to ramp up their impact factor, even if it's just, oh, X says this and Y says this and Z says this. Now all of them have been mentioned, have been quote unquote quoted in another paper in a quote unquote high impact journal. So they're not killing the humanities on purpose. The humanities have been on purpose, been killed off for a very long time. I wonder where this professor of classics has been the past 100 years. Anyways, let's continue. Let's first consider some of the evidence. Back in June, Jennifer Fry, a philosophy professor at the University of Tulsa, never heard of her, announced that her institution's new provost fired her as the dean of the honors college that she had run for 2 years. Why? According to the provost, the program Fry established for the college was too expensive. But this was a puzzling suggestion. The university possesses a 1.36 billion endowment, and by all accounts, Frey's new program, which focused on reading core texts in the humanistic tradition, was phenomenally successful. Right. Just in terms of argument, that endowment on its own, that's just a number. You don't know running costs, etc. And to say that something was phenomenally successful doesn't say anything about an actual. I mean, if you want to argue by numbers, you have to argue by numbers. This is not argued by numbers. Yeah. So you actually have to you have to say how much the program brings in, because let's face it, universities are glorified real estate empires, and they found an ingenious way, just like McDonald's, to make the land very productive. So if we want to argue in these financial terms, you have to argue and this is what the author doesn't do. So I wonder what the article is actually what's the article actually trying to say, because now you've started out by making the claim about money, where this should not be about money. I would not ever even concede any turf. You do not argue in those terms. You don't, because this isn't about money. The fact that universities, etc., especially in America, it's all about endowments and trillions and billions that they get, and the money that they bring in from alumni, etc. That is already the problem. That's the issue. The issue isn't whether a program is successful. A program doesn't need to be successful. It doesn't need to bring in money. If this is about a humanities education, genuine Bildung, in the proper sense of the word, money is not the issue. You see, what they did with the Bologna process in Europe is to try and tie the European university that grew organically, and I'm speaking about the continental university, try and tie it to the Anglo-American system. That's all about rankings and money and impact factors, etc. So this article, it took the author less than 2 paragraphs to basically argue against his own position that apparently he has, which is, it's not about money, it's about values. Well, if it's about value, then do not even argue in favor of how they might see, how an administrator might see the point. It's not about success. That's not the point. What are the humanities supposed to do? That's the point. Anyways, enrollment in Tulsa's honors college grew, you see again, grew by over 500%. It matters not. It matters not the number. It does not matter. This article is, what a great headline. They're killing the humanities on purpose. And how can you just destroy your own argument 5 sentences in? I don't understand it. Retention rates, again, retention rates. Have you heard of this? If you're not inside academia, you've never heard of this. Retention rates, that's what they all worry about. You know why? Because they need to keep you basically on retainer. They need to make sure that you stay for 4 years and pay up your fees. That's how they make the most money off of you. That's what he's saying here, right? This is not about making sure that students come and in a participatory manner begin to learn and see, have a glimpse at the meaning of existence, perhaps. No, this is about retention rates. Great. Wonderful. The program managed to attract multiple major grants and gifts. I almost read grifts, anyways. And although we're often told that contemporary college students lack the skills, patience, or inclination to read great on any works of literature, history, and philosophy, pupils flock to Fry's College. Wonderful. Even administrators at far richer institutions are claiming the need to slash the humanities because of fiscal capacity. In July, the University of Chicago's provost announced plans to restructure its division of the arts and humanities, potentially gutting language instruction, consolidating departments, reducing. I mean, who needs ancient Greek? Who needs, if you speak English, why would you learn French or Italian or Spanish or maybe even German? Why would you? No need for that. We've got all the language models in the world, to LLMs, whatever they're called, to do all the translation work in a nanosecond. Anyway, so they're consolidating departments. That's something, by the way, this consolidation of departments, that's a typical strategy of the so-called neoliberal university, which ironically has its greatest critics inside the university. And what the consolidation is important. For example, the college that I taught at, which was Birkbeck College in London, they recently consolidated all of their humanities departments, got rid of them, basically, got rid of the philosophy department, etc., and consolidated that into the school. I think it's called something like School of Arts and Humanities. And this is a money decision, yeah, because now once you've done that, you take away so many of the rights and privileges of the professors, and you make them basically teaching staff at a new kind of school, which serves the purpose that it already basically has, which is to be a printing press for a printing machine for a printer, for degrees. Yeah. Which is also the reason why Birkbeck has lost basically almost every single one of their really highly established and, let's just say, within the confines of academia, important scholars. Anyway, so they're reducing graduate studies and establishing minimum class sizes. As for one institution with an over 10 billion endowment, famous the world over for its humanities programs, would make such a dramatic change, administrators offered a vague rationale centered on historic funding pressures. But what specifically are these pressures? Good point. As Clifford Ando, a distinguished professor of classics at Chicago, details in some illuminating articles, the university's leadership has for years spent vast amounts of money, largely on STEM projects, and then attempted to weaken its division of the arts and humanities as a means to pay for these investments. Now, that to me, however, is striking. Now, I have no idea who Clifford Ando is, and I cannot speak to um, his estimation here, and this will certainly be correct. Because obviously Professor Ando has a much better insight into STEM projects. But what strikes me as a bit odd is that those STEM projects very often they are run anyways in cahoots with, for example, big tech or big pharma. So funding should not be that much of an issue. That's at least my suspicion. And as I just said in the beginning, and I'll say this again, if you want to help fund and also improve your life as you do, the humanities are alive and well at my Halion Academy. So have a browse, check out the courses, join a course today, whether you're listening to this on YouTube or Twitter or wherever else. Head over to halionacademy.teachable.com. Buy a course, for example, the Philosophy of Health course, which begins if you want to do live seminars. There's something I learned, by the way, about all this digital stuff, because I work digital first, is that digital has all of its pitfalls and dangers, etc. But as we know, where there is danger, there salvation grows also. If the digital, and that's what it usually does, it can amplify the analog. So that's how we should use it. Anyways, let's continue here. So this is what Ando says. Ando says, and the author quotes that professor saying that to finance STEM projects, they needed to cut down on the arts and humanities. I don't believe that for a second, though. Obviously, there are fiscal problems in American higher education, you don't say. But it's quite a leap to suggest that the humanities are responsible for them. Excellent. Or must pay the greatest price, actually. In fact, as Ando writes, they are the only faculty in the arts and sciences who systematically pay for themselves. They do not need expensive buildings, not even extensive buildings, I should say. Or in my case, with Halion, no buildings at all. In fact, I wonder to the degree to which the nomad scholar, which who were around for centuries before the first university was built in Bologna, whether that's not the better model in a sense, and you can use a synthesis, a concretion between the digital and the analog, where you learn digitally, but you really learn because you take the time to read properly and to write and to structure your thoughts, etc. And then you meet up in what we now call, funnily enough, in real life, and you also begin to change your life according to what you're learning. Because learning to some degree is, of course, always really virtual. All right. So, sorry, let me go on here. So, in fact, as Professor Ando writes, that means the humanities, are the only faculty in the arts and sciences who systematically pay for themselves. They do not need expensive buildings. They do not require substantial material infrastructure or expensive data sets for research. The provision of instruction in their field is cheap. I agree with all of this, but again, why is Ando and so Ando is not the author of this piece. Clifford Ando is quoted here by Eric Adler, who's the author of this piece. Why are both of them, independently of each other, playing into this mousetrap? Why do they fall for this and try and argue that it's actually cheap to run this? Once you have they not learned anything about negotiation leverage? If you enter the negotiation by saying, by the way, what I'm doing is very cheap, you've given up all your leverage. The next thing your opponent will say is, well, how can we make it even cheaper? That's not how you argue this. You do not argue money in the first place. That's how you argue this. You don't argue money. Because if they say that they do not require substantial material infrastructure, well, then the administrators will say, oh, by the way, what about libraries? They're very costly to run. All these old books, they should all be digitized. Let's bring Google in and digitize all these books. And let's get rid of a library. Who needs a library to begin with? A place where you can sit in quiet for hours and hours and read an actual physical book? That's unnecessary. Those could be turned into coffee shops, shopping malls, or spaces where you can cuddle with, I don't know, what they actually did at Warwick University where I did my PhD. They brought in puppies, dogs to stroke and cuddle during during the exam period, because students were all so anxious. You know, the fact that perhaps 60% of them should not be at university in the first place has never crossed anyone's mind. You see, most people who are at university at this point should not be at university. That's another issue that none of these authors would ever address. There is an elite overproduction, not just in the West, but across the world. The problem isn't woke. The problem is who goes to study at university. So again, all the arguments that we've learned so far, and we're halfway through the article almost, no, not quite, a third maybe, is it just about money? Thus, it seems to many professors of the humanities that fiscal crisis has become a pretext for far-reaching changes that are not necessary so much as desired by university leaders. Fair point. The tragedy of the contemporary academy, Fry concludes, is that even when traditional liberal learning clearly wins with students and donors, it loses with those in power. Interesting. Who are those in power? Why might university leaders, including those at wealthy and prestigious institutions, deliberately choose to undercut humanistic education research? Now, I hope we get finally to the revelatory points. Many reasons suggest themselves. Surely the incessant reports of artificial intelligence spelling the end of reading and writing aren't helping matters. And STEM and vocational fields are far more often recipients of grants and as potentially important sources of revenue. But we should not overlook a deeper structural rationale built into the very creation of American research universities in the late 19th century. Prior to that time, higher education in the United States looked very different. The small colleges that dotted the nation then typically possessed a prescribed curriculum, a series of classes that were required of all students. Greatly influenced by the spirit of Renaissance humanism, these institutions devoted outsized attention to the study of ancient Greek and Roman literature, which students were to encounter in their original languages. The leaders of the early American colleges believed that the study of the masterworks of Greco-Roman antiquity was key to shaping students' characters, a prime goal of higher education in the United States. Not only in the United States, dare I say. Thus, students who aimed to earn a bachelor's degree translated a lot of Latin and ancient Greek texts during their school years. And one would hope that they did that not only during their university studies, but already previously at grammar school, prior to university, I mean. So much of their education was taken up with reading both sacred and secular works from antiquity. By taking in the wisdom of these writings and the examples of virtuous conduct found therein, America's young could learn how to live up to their higher potential. Now, that's all wonderful. I wonder, though, whether the university is even the place for that. And I mean, you can all be good conservatives and look back at what should have been or how things should have turned out, but why has the university become what it is now, which is planetary, which is globalized, which is the why is it the place for STEM? Why is it the place for the future technocrats? And instead of just saying it's taken the wrong turn, we should have all kept reading Latin and Greek. Perhaps there's something much deeper now, to come back to the point I made earlier about the so-called cathedral, that there is something church-like about the university from its very beginning, even in Bologna. It is the place. Let's not romanticize the university, not even the liberal arts college. The university, Cambridge and Oxford, are perhaps the most, you know, striking examples, historically speaking, and so obvious what they were, is where you send your child if he was intelligent enough to become a priest or to become an administrator. And the reason why you would read Latin is not so much to it's all these conservative impulses are often just reactionary. No, it's just shape your character. No, it's because it would get you ahead. It would give you a good position within either state or church administration. That's the reality very often that we should not neglect. So in fact, the hope would have been, if we talk about the 19th century, that thinkers like Humboldt and Fichte and others said, is that the university, freed from the church, thanks to the Enlightenment, could finally become free from it. But instead, what it had, what's now is the 21st century, I'm sorry to say, what it has become is what is. Yeah, that's the essence of the university. The essence of the university isn't something you can retrieve from some sacred place. It is what is and what it has become, and that is the place where the technocrats and managers of this planetary system are being educated. So let it just die, or let it go in its own way. It does what it's supposed to do. The cathedral, the church, is taking on a new space and a new role, and it's still breeding its own administrators. That's what it's doing, and is doing a pretty good job at it. Not that I agree with anything of it, quite the opposite, but that's what it does. So the university, to get rid of the humanities, is exactly what it needs to do, because it needs unthinking human beings who are the produced as a pseudo elite to manage the planetary, or to manage the decline of the planet. I don't know. So again, if you're looking for the way out, you need to go somewhere else, because what you really need for the humanities isn't very much. Actually, what you really need is a book. You need just to read um, Plato. You can do that on your own, and once the time comes, just try and find a reading group, or maybe take one of our courses or someone else's courses on any of the texts that you'd like to read. So the Halion Academy is always open. And if you are in America or Northern America, more generally speaking, or the UK, it's at a fraction of the fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the cost, or whatever. It's tiny. The amounts are tiny compared to what you would have to pay at a university college. So, and also, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube and you'd like me to read your comment or question at the end, leave a super chat, and I see them. I don't see anything but super chats. Thank you. Such a heavy focus, the author continues, on classical literature, this is right here, was always controversial here, and for legitimate reasons. Why, many wondered, should students devote so much of their time to the study of two dead languages? Yeah, that's always what idiots say. Why should the nations call, I mean, not the author, I'm sorry if that came across wrong. Um, you see, I don't know who he means by many wondered should students devote so much of their time to the study of two dead languages. Um, in Europe, no one ever wondered about that. Yeah. Uh, I mean, the people who matter don't wonder about that. That's so. If you see, one of the issues that I also have with this is that it's always just it's elitist, but it tries to be egalitarian. The fact is, especially the humanities are and should be and must be to the extreme elitist. If you read Plato's Republic and you want to be a good Democrat, and I don't mean a member of the Democratic Party in the US, I mean a good believer in democracy, then why are you even reading the book? You are either born with a golden soul or not. There is a clear cosmic hierarchy that cannot be overturned. This is what conservatives always do. "Oh, it's a meritocracy." You remember who kept going on about this? The meritocracy. No, it's yes, merit maybe can play a part, but ultimately it's extremely elitist. And it should be. It has to be. Or else and in fact, as we are entering the post-literate world, we need to be even more elitist. And in some ways, more esoteric and more exclusionary than ever before. In the late 19th century, a group of American reformers radically recast their nation's higher education, establishing a system of research universities that would eclipse the classical colleges. These reformers, whom the historian Andrew Jewett has called the first generation of scientific Democrats, aimed to recenter higher education on the scientific method. Critical of the dominance of the classical humanities and theology in the classical colleges, the scientific Democrats hoped to reorient American higher learning around the natural and social sciences, believing that the scientific method could supply the requisite tools to foment a cohesive and robust democratic society. To this end, interesting in light of what I just said about Plato's Republic, perhaps. To this end, the scientific Democrats jettisoned the prescribed curricula of the classical colleges in which the classical humanities and theology played such a prominent part. Heavily influenced by the recent publication of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, these reformers favored an elective based course of studies, which they cast as an educational survival of the fittest. Students would choose all their own courses, and those disciplines that failed to win sufficient enrollments would die, and rightly so. Well, I just don't think that that's really what happened. I mean, even if that's true that they were really influenced by Darwin, etc., um, and it's all just but sufficient enrollment. I mean, the fact is that there is, just crudely speaking, there's an incentive structure in the broader national economy that benefits and less profits certain disciplines over others. For example, law, and you can make a lot more money as a lawyer, a solicitor, as the British would say, in the city of London, for example, or in Manhattan. That so you have to wonder. I mean, who makes those incentive structures? I mean, who decides, for example, that the new priest class is ultimately that lawyers are parts of that. Maybe not entirely priests, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. So it's not just that students choose, which is still sort of you know ultimately is democratic, as the author points out up here, sort of a mob rule of what gets to survive and what doesn't. But as a matter of fact, if that had been the case, then by this time now, given that it's now 2025, and this is almost 200 years ago, by now, all the humanities, all those disciplines should have ended. And that's not what we've seen, even at the most cutthroat institutions, if you like. Students flock to philosophy, for example, or literature, the classics in general. Um, so that argument to me is a bit wobbly. Anyways, many of the scientific Democrats turned their institutions into bona fide research universities where scientific style research and the concomitant creation of new knowledge would thrive. Professors of the humanities, whose efforts were previously focused on the transmission of wisdom from masterpieces to the classical past, would now be compelled to produce such research, which always fit the natural and social sciences better than it did the humanities. Now, this I think is a striking point, because what you have here is sort of this necessity to be original, but also to, and this I think the author doesn't go there. But for example, what some philosophy professors in Germany say is that we should still read Hegel, but only insofar as Hegel is useful for neu- neuroscience or psychology, etc. So you can read the phenomenology of spirit, but only if you can make good use of it for something that is really part of the natural sciences or the social sciences. Let's say you read Hegel, but only to understand social mechanisms better in sociology. So that I think is a very good, fair point here by the author, that this is something that the humanities have basically been reduced to the demands of the natural and social sciences, even though I wonder what a social science really is supposed to be. And however, I would critique this here is that the transmission of wisdom from masterpieces of the classical past. I The reason I have an issue with this is that it it makes timeless what really isn't timeless. So we always have to. Wisdom isn't there's no transmission of wisdom. I mean, wisdom isn't something that you can transmit. You have to wrestle with the text, and that requires that we read a text anew in every generation. By the way, my if I dare point this out, um, my book on Aristotle's eudaimonia is such an attempt, and I hope that many of you, because actually quite a few people have already bought the book, so I hope that if you haven't done so yet, buy the book. Uh, it's it attempts many new translations at some of those words, where eudaimonia begins to mean the familiarity of the world rather than just happiness. The well-spiritedness of your ancestors as they come together with you and your offspring. That's what eudaimonia is, and many other foundational Greek words newly translated moving away from the Latin translation that we have inherited. So, you don't just transmit wisdom. Very few people in their lives will become wise. So, in some sense, maybe if this is what all they were doing is regurgitating the values of the past, the virtues and vices they warned against, maybe they were ripe for the taking. You have to ask, why were these here better able to? Why were they able to kill off, if that's what the claim is, the so-called liberal college, the liberal arts college? Maybe it was ripe for the taking. Maybe it was just over. Guess what isn't over? The Halion Academy. So head on over to the Halion Academy now and buy a course and support the work here. Thank you. And again, at a fraction of the cost that all you good American listeners would have to pay at an American liberal arts college. And the best part is no exams. No marks, no gradings, nothing, no grades, nothing. It's about learning. There's no degree. So it means there's no certificate. That's to say, it's actually free because a liberal arts college isn't free. Ultimately, you're going there to get a degree to become a writer for the Atlantic. Let's face it. Let's just be honest. What do you do at a liberal arts college? And how do you become a writer at the Atlantic? Who do you have to know? Who do you have to be? Who do etc. American institutions of higher learning, or the New Yorker, of course, American institutions of higher learning have obviously experienced many changes since then. And that's such a throwaway. Did AI write this for you? Who wrote the sentence? That's such a. No one should write a sentence like this. If you wrote a sentence like this, and I was to mark your essay, I would fail your essay for just that one sentence. But the system remains narrowly organized around the sciences and far less amenable to the needs of a humanistic education. As proponents of the humanities have voted for over a century, the humanistic disciplines were likely to wither in a system deliberately created to marginalize them. It has taken decades, but that marginalization is now obvious to all and continues apace. Yes, it's called technocracy. Welcome to reality. Hence, contemporary administrators naturally undercut because what they want is an unthinking breeding mass of people who are so isolated and reduced in their being that if they even have as much as the inkling of a question, that something that could bother or worry them, they will just ask Chat GPT. That is what the aim is of this. That's so obvious for anyone to see. So that if ever you even have as much as a question in your streamlined existence, what you will do is you will pull out your phone and ask your personal Chat GPT with your your preferred female or male responding voice that will sugarcoat anything for you, and a narcissistic positive feedback loop just tell you that everything's all right and you're perfectly fine where you are, etc. That's the end game of this. That's where the uncanny wheel work is taking not even the last man, but this breeding mass that the human being now is. That's what is. That's not what's about to come. That's what already is. It's already here. Hence, contemporary administrators naturally undercut. Blah blah blah. Okay, without another major change in intellectual and pedagogical. Oh, here's the wagging finger. Without another major change in intellectual and pedagogical orientation, this is precisely where I am, what one would expect to see. Yes, and that major change will not come. Lost in these vicissitudes is the notion that American colleges and universities should be countercultural institutions in the best sense of that term. In a society dominated by so much economic hustling, finally, they should provide opportunities for Aristotelian leisure. Excellent. There we are. To allow undergraduates the opportunity to contemplate the human predicament and determine the sort of life they'd like to lead and the sort of nation they'd like to inhabit. Now, this is what one would hope for. The entire essay addressed. If that had been, which clearly is on the author's mind, if that had been the opening statement, and hence also what the rest of the article tries to convey, this would have been so much better. Because if you have such a bold headline, they're killing the humanities on purpose. Yes, I know that you'd like to argue for it, etc. That's all fine, but then you need to really deliver. And this is crucial. Again, leisure in Greek is skole or skoli, and I invite you once more to read my book on Aristotle's Eudaimonia. Subtitle is Human Flourishing and Divine Telos in Aristotle's Ethics. I translate scolaire, for example, not as leisure, but as the measure of sufficiency. So what actually needs to happen, and this is what we need to build towards, is an entirely different economic system. You cannot have just, a little corner cut out for you. You need to rebuild this system You have to tear it all down and rebuild from the ground up, where you will still have credit and interest, etc., but you won't have usury and high finance or hyper financialization, which is all anti-scholastic, anti-scolaire, to the core, anti-leisure. In a society obsessed with utilitarian approaches to education, yes, our institutions of higher learning should focus on character development just as much as they highlight career training. And in a country often oblivious to the past, they ought to act as stewards of culture, protecting a common human heritage as carefully as they produce new knowledge. Now, this I'd like to, you know, this is where finally it gets interesting. And one would hope that, and this is what I'm working on, by the way, and I have been for several years, with a book on Wilhelm von Humboldt's university, the future of the university, basically, is trying to articulate what really the university should be and could be, given also the new technologies that we now have at our fingertips. You are listening to this either on Twitter or on YouTube, and in a couple of days also on my Substack. So, what does that mean for learning? Yeah, what the university, I think, is passé. It's over. It's done, and it won't go away. But it what there's no need for any sort of romantic notion of the university or liberal arts college. Even. It's not even necessary. I would let it die and have all the radicals be independent and out there and do their own thing and see what comes of it. But to be stewards, yes, of memory, I would say, protecting, I don't know, our common human heritage, that's too wishy-washy, that's wishy-washy liberalism here, as always. But new knowledge, the production of new knowledge, well, I don't know if knowledge is something that you produce. An Aristotelian should know better than to say that knowledge is something that we produce. But yeah, I would rewrite this entire sentence here, but I ultimately agree with the sentiment. Anyways, our system of higher education cannot do these crucial things with leaders who undervalue the humanities, who fail to broaden our approach to the liberal arts beyond the scientific vision of higher education pioneered in the 19th century. It's always the 19th century, isn't it? To a great extent, it appears our crisis of the humanities is a crisis of academic leadership, a crisis of will, not capacity. Well, no, I think it's a deeply ontological crisis in a time where we don't know who and what we are. And that leadership, quote unquote, that we have is ultimately just a reflection. It's a symptom of the world we inhabit rather than it's a crisis of, because that talk of a crisis, that's again just the postmodern, that's just postmodernism, postmodern lingo here. It's just this crisis is actually a crisis of that crisis, and then we endlessly talk about crisis. It's not a crisis because nothing ever gets decided. It just hurls down further into the abyss. So what actually has to happen is to let the system die, and it is on life support anyways, and not worried too much about it, really. They are killing the humanities on purpose. I've outlined why I think that's being done. If you're just listening in now, listen back to what I said. I think it's being done on purpose, but the author isn't even halfway um, as radical in his estimation. It's just a crisis of academic. They just lack the imagination to understand how important character development is. Blah blah. No, that's not the point. Those leaders, those administrators, they are hired for that purpose. It's not a crisis. They are placed where they are to do what they do because the end game has the goal has been postulated and decades ago. This isn't just something that happened a few weeks ago. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to support genuine philosophical study, support the Halion, sign up for Halion Academy, sign up for a course here. So that's the Halion Academy. Head on over there and buy a course, support the work. There's so many. And this is just a fraction of the courses. So if you're interested, maybe you know how to build a life in the digital age that is worthy of the life of the mind, then the intellectual life course is really for you. So there's, I don't know, 30 videos or more, and you can listen to them and start thinking about what it means to build a life of the mind that is focused and beautiful and enriching, and also that leads to action where theoria and praxis are bridged and come together. There's so many more courses. So head on over to the Halion Academy website now, wherever you are listening to this, and share this stream with anyone. I don't like saying this, but I have to start saying these things. If you're listening to this on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. If you're listening to this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Do please hit the like button, as much as I loathe saying this. And also, if you want to be alerted that I'm going live, you should click the bell, the notification bell. So you will get an email, or maybe something will pop up on your app or on YouTube when I'm going live. Okay, so follow me on Twitter if you're listening there. Subscribe to my channel, and also head over to the Halion course website and buy a course. Tell your friends, tell your family at a fraction of the cost, and also buy my Aristotle book on eudaimonia, human flourishing and divine telos in Aristotle's ethics. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to do more things like this in the future. If there are essays such as this one worth reading, of course, all of my criticisms here are, I mean well. I don't. I just want to point out we should be even more radical. If you have a headline, if that's the title of your essay, you have to go all in. Because what you have to tell me is what the purpose is. What is that purpose of On Purpose? I've laid out that purpose, so listen back. I think it's about producing even more of an unthinking, breeding mass that will never question anything. Or if they question, it'll be within extremely narrow confines that are perfectly predictively programmed into them. All right, now to all you free thinkers and radicals, head over to Halion and support the work here. The best thing to do is buy a course. Thank you.